ekipa, dobrodošli u još jednu digitalnu kavu na netokraciji. Ja sam Ivan Brkan iz netokracije naravno, samo mi je Krešimir Končić iz Neurolaba i samo jedan poseban gost, ali za njega ću se prebaciti na engleski. Danas se održava WebCamp i povodom toga i ide nadam se zanimljiv intervju, vidjet ćemo koliko znate o Gutenbergu, WordPressu i tako dalje, bit će zanimljivo. Hello Morten, how are you doing?
Good, yeah.
You understood everything, right?
Oh yes, all of it.
All of it, okay. So just to start, can you tell our viewers who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Morten. I live in Canada and I am a contributor to the WordPress project, and I also work for LinkedIn Learning, which is an online learning resource where I teach WordPress and front-end development and other things.
Awesome. Great. So one of the more important projects recently has, of course, been WordPress Gutenberg.
Can you tell us your vision about what Gutenberg is for you? And your opinion, why is this so important for WordPress evolution?
First of all, the community is not talking enough about Gutenberg because it changes pretty much everything we know about how WordPress works. The reason why it's important is because up until Gutenberg, the basic function of WordPress is you have essentially two fields of content that you can interact with when you create pages or posts, unless you add custom post types or something else. So you have the title field, and then you have the content field. And inside the content field, you can put short codes and you can do all kinds of stuff if you want to, but generally it's just one big blob of content, and you put stuff into it, and then you display it as one big blob. What Gutenberg does is it introduces this concept of blocks. So a block is a piece of content that can be combined with any other piece of content that then all get collated into this content blob. And the idea is once you add a block, you can then keep it where you originally added it, or you can move it around, and you can also control the behavior of that one block. So you can say this block should be full width, so full bleed across the full screen, and this blob should actually be next to another block. And actually in my article, I want to put a widget in the middle of the article as its own block. And what you're seeing is Gutenberg is really the first step in an evolution into a completely different way of working with WordPress, because right now it lives inside the content editor only. So you have your title field, and then you have all these blocks that you can add in.
Okay.
The next iteration of it will be Gutenberg in the customizer. So you can drag blocks into the customizer and place them outside of the conventional area for the content field. And eventually what we will see, which of course depends on millions of factors, but what we will see is WordPress as a whole just becoming a set of blocks. So rather than saying, I want to make a post and then the post always looks the same and then you get the same sidebar or the same sidebars, what you'll end up with is a situation where you say, I want to create a new view. And in that view, for this particular piece of content, I'm going to take this block and that block and this block and just build the view out. And then you can have each individual piece of content will then be its own view, and you can change everything about how it works, which is fundamentally different from how WordPress works right now.
Is this more helpful to designers and developers, or to end users like content makers and clients?
So me or him?
Yeah.
Who benefits more?
This is the unanswered question. Much of the critique that's coming against Gutenberg has to do with what you're asking, which is it's fancy and it does a lot of interesting things, but there's not clarity in who this was built for and who this benefits. And the deeper you dig into the project, the more you realize that has never actually been defined. So there's no clear target audience. It's more like we need to push content editing on the web forward, and we need to introduce this idea of blocks because that will be good for people. Generally, without any real connection to there's this use case where this would be useful, or there are these people that need it. So some people say that this will benefit anyone who currently uses page builders, and I believe that's true. Like anyone who installs WordPress and then puts Divi on top of it, or puts one of these like Beaver Builder or something else, this is basically that just built into WordPress core. But then the type of person who does that is a very different user than, say, the regular blogger, right? So you get this weird scenario where you have to start talking about the nature of the regular WordPress user. Like, who is it that uses WordPress? Is it someone who just blogs? Is it someone who uses a page builder to create all these custom things? Is it a developer, a designer, or what? And how will this interface impact those different users? Because if you're just a blogger and all you want to do is just write up content, I'm not sure blocks will help you. I think it might actually be quite a big blocker in the way.
Why do you think it would be a big blocker?
Because there's so much stuff going on, right?
Okay.
You used to be able to just say, I'm going to write a new post. To put in the title, you just type out your post, publish, done. Now you have to go put in the title, then pick a block, and then start typing. And then you go, oh, no, I need an image. Then I have to figure the image block. And then how am I going to, I can make it.
But isn't that the same use cases now? Because now you don't have to click on add an image. I mean, the difference between a block as an image, I understand about the more advanced types of blocks and everything, but if it's an image, it's an image. I can click on it in the toolbar, or I can add a block.
Oh, but see, will there be a toolbar?
Good point.
Currently,
so if I have
there
like
is no
100
toolbar, right?
Yeah.
Right now, the idea is that every single new piece of content is its own block. So a paragraph is a block, and a block quote is a block, and an image is a block, and a gallery component is a block, and a quote is a block, and a poem piece is a block. Like, everything is now a block, and you can select them from drop downs and pick which blocks you want to use and format each individual piece of content as a block, which adds this really complex abstraction layer on top of the content, which, if you come from a web standards perspective, is good, because then you can say, you can actually mark up each block as it's supposed to be, right? Rather than just say, here's a bunch of paragraphs and they're all not actually paragraphs. But if you are just creating content, you now have to interact with all these different blocks and figure out how they work and what they do and whether or not you're using the right one. And that's where that complication kicks in.
Netokrate is a website where we create a lot of content types. But what I feel is, again, when we are talking about who Gutenberg was built for, I mean, when I saw it, it was like, yeah, that's what we need. Unfortunately, although some of the biggest WordPress VIP customers are publishers, I have the feeling that publishers don't really understand where good, like most of the critique, positive or negative, is coming from the developer community, the bloggers. But publishers, both small and big, aren't really, I wouldn't say interested, but aren't really part of the conversation.
Yes. There's an outreach issue right there, that this thing is coming, but it's not being talked about in the right communities. So the people who will be impacted by this are the regular people who are on the outside of the community just using WordPress, right? And they need to be introduced to this very carefully, because it is such a fundamental change to how things are currently done. Now, one of the things that people have brought up is there's a risk that, if you go to a huge publication, like a newspaper or an academic institution or something like that, where they've built these super advanced ways of handling content inside WordPress with a ton of custom post types and custom fields and all this interface stuff on the back end. And then you throw Gutenberg at them and say, actually, no, we're changing everything. It's not going to look the same. You're not going to be able to fall back to the old way it looked. Everything is now new. That means retraining the entire staff on this new interface. And it also means the engineering that went into making it work now has to be changed, right? Because if you started building a newspaper now and Gutenberg was already there, you would use blocks, right? So you would say your custom post types have these types of blocks and your custom fields are blocks, and you can drag and drop them in, and you get much of what, for instance, magazines want, which is this idea of you can, instead of just writing an article, you can write an article and drop in the types of content you want, and promoted content and whatever, which is something that most of these larger sites are already doing, but they all have their own custom way of doing it. The problem is they already built that. They already spent hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars building these super complicated interfaces, right? That fit exactly with what they need. Gutenberg comes along, they then have to make a choice. Do we reinvest and convert all this stuff so that it now works in this new block paradigm? Or do we find a way of reverse engineering WordPress back to the way it was so that we don't have to retrain the staff? So what you'll end up with is this demarcation line between everyone who wants to stick with how it used to be and everyone who wants to go with this block model. And it'll take probably 5 years for everything to churn around to the point where if Gutenberg gets rolled out now and the evolution happens the way it's supposed to, it'll probably take 5 years before the biggest consumers actually use it. And it might even take longer because it's such an investment to change, right? It is similar to if you have a large organization that everything is based on Google platforms, everyone's using Google Docs and everything else, and then you just say one day, to hell with this, we're going to Microsoft platform overnight. So we're just going to switch everything overnight, and then everyone has to learn this new stuff. But don't slow down. You have to do the same amount of work with the same stuff without any training. Right?
So basically what you're saying is we're on the verge of a revolution.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I don't know the backstory of why they chose the name Gutenberg. But if you, like, in hindsight, you can say, well, it's because it's actually revolutionary. I'm not sure that's the reason why they chose it. I think it was more because Gutenberg was working with movable type and stuff like that. But it's the Gutenbergian revolution really was a revolution. It upended everything about how content was typed and written down and destroyed an entire industry of handwriting documents, but then launched an entire new industry, right? So what we will see is a significant upheaval in the WordPress community. And it won't be an upheaval inside, the community of people who talk about WordPress all the time. It'll be an upheaval outside the community of all the people who actually use WordPress. Because they'll be faced with a new interface that does things differently, and they'll have to make a choice. Do I now invest time in understanding this stuff, or do I switch to another platform? So there is a risk that this will result in a culling where a bunch of people will just go, screw this stuff. Why do they keep changing it? Yeah. And then just jump to other platforms. And there's a ton of other smaller platforms, especially that focus on blogging.
So Go stands
they're well aware of this, and they are actively going like, when they dump this on the internet, we're just going to go out and pull as many people onto our platform.
So what do you think are these current platforms like Wix, Squarespace or Medium influencing the evolution of WordPress into Gutenberg? Or was there like a change that folks from WordPress saw that page builders in WordPress are a good thing? So what do you think, what has the most impact on evolution of Gutenberg?
That's a tough question to answer because it requires being able to see into other people's heads.
We can try.
So the concept of Gutenberg, as in this block level editing stuff, was first introduced by Mel Choice and Johan Asmundsen, who are the people who ran out Gutenberg in 2013. So this is not new. Right? This was actually on screen at WordCamp US or WordCamp San Francisco at the time in 2013. Okay. And it's taken that many years just to get to a point where this gets rolled out. In the meantime, in between that original idea and now, Medium popped up, right? And Medium has this new way of editing where you can go into an individual line and then click a plus button and do things. If you go to LinkedIn Pulse, it does the same things. There's this other way of editing content that's popped up, right? And then meanwhile, WordPress has been stuck with TinyMCE. Now, I have yet to see a user test on the differences between TinyMCE and that inline editing stuff and whether or not one is better than the other. And we have not done, like the WordPress community has not done that user test. This is all based on an assumption that this will be better for people. And it's a very much like a, I believe the wind is coming from the left, therefore we're going this way and we're just going to go all out into it. So yes, it's a competitive step to see if we can jump ahead of some of these competitors like Wix and Squarespace and everything. But it's an interesting step because while that's a commercial contest for companies like Automatic, the real competitors to WordPress as like an open source platform that anyone can use and develop stuff for is not Wix and it's not Squarespace. It's all these new blogging platforms that run without servers on the back end, that make static sites, that do all these other things, right? Okay. And you can see that in the developer community, a lot of people are moving away from content management systems and towards these auto-generated systems that just run off simple databases that are kind of cobbled together. And it's simply because they don't want the complex user interface and the heavy load of running a templating engine in the back end, right?
I have...
and then on top of that, just to make things super weird, in addition to Gutenberg, we also have the REST API, right? Which just decouples content from WordPress entirely. So basically, WordPress becomes an interface to put content into a database, and then you use the REST API and pull the content out and do whatever you want with it outside of WordPress. Now, if you combine that with Gutenberg, you basically get WordPress becomes this thing where you can just store any data you want in any structure you want and pull it out.
It's data management system, right?
Except the way Gutenberg implements it is it puts all the blocks into the single content database hold and then marks off the different pieces of content using HTML tags. So if you query data from a specific block within posts in Gutenberg, you're still querying the entire content for each individual post and then pulling a piece of content out from the content blob and serving it over. So it's an inefficient methodology. And it's unfortunate because one of the major critiques of WordPress for many, many years from the outside world is WordPress operates on a blob. That's what makes it not a proper content management system, is that you can't separate content out unless you use advanced custom fields or pods or something else, right? And Gutenberg had the opportunity to say, you know what, we're going to decouple this. We're going to make a content field, and then we're going to make a bunch of blocks. And then we'll tie them together using JSON or whatever. But instead, they just chose to shove all the the blocks into the blob, and then parse it on the fly when it's needed. So some of the articles we'll write online now are about that, you know, this needs to change before it goes live because this is the opportunity to change how WordPress handles data. And if it's not done now, it'll never change.
Of course, but I would say that subjectively, I saw that sometimes WordPress community and Matt, for instance, reacts to Wix actions. Like, for instance, there was a community action that we need Google Ads to market WordPress. We need Facebook ads to market WordPress. We as an agency, we are developing VP for 10 years now. We got inquiry from Automatic what we would change commercially, how to market WordPress. And I think this was in line to like a reaction to Wix and Squarespace. So I think that some of the core senior members thinks as Wix and Squarespace as competitor to WordPress. One other thing, it's also like a Shopify thing and scale thing. Some of the members of the whole WP community think that WooCommerce can scale like Shopify.
Well, it can. So that's there's
like,
that's not an actual conversation worth having. It's like, no.
So the thing is,
WordPress is not good for e-commerce. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, for us in the agency, this is a connected issue because you have one set of clients that wants to use and utilize Wix, Squarespace, Shopify, and for us in production, this is the competition.
Yeah.
And also from, I would say, some of the major senior members from the WP community, they're also seeing this as a competition. And this was the reason why, I don't know if you see it, but WordPress ran some video ads on YouTube.
Yeah, I've seen them.
And this was pretty strange to see because it's not like, I would say, DNA of our community.
Yeah, and it begs questions about what is WordPress, right? And what is it that makes WordPress valuable, right? Not in cash, but what is it that makes WordPress valuable to the people who use WordPress, right? Why is it people choose an open source platform that they have to set up and install and do everything with themselves rather than go and pay someone for some sort of solution where the reality is the cost of running WordPress on your own server and paying for shared hosting and everything is about the same as the cost of running Wix or anything else, except you're doing all this extra maintenance work, right? So what is it that makes WordPress attractive to end users? Well, there are things like total control. You're not handing your information over to a corporation. There is the fact that you can actually go in and hack it yourself and do whatever you want. It is the fact that you can extend it and make it into what you want. But what I think is happening when you look at Wix and all these other software as a service competitors, including WordPress.com, is people don't want to do all that work, right? So they want to just click a button, get a website. But they want to click a button and get a website where they can sell stuff, or where they can, host their portfolio or do whatever. And WordPress, the blogging platform that eventually grew to become a CMS, was never meant to do that. All that stuff has been cobbled on through plugins. And there's, when you mention WooCommerce, I have always said you should not build e-commerce solutions on WordPress. And it's not because, when I say you, I mean not an agency. Agencies can do that. But you as just a person who's like, I want to sell t-shirts. If you want to sell t-shirts online, you should use a hosted solution, because there are all these issues around security, around taxes, around accounting, around very complex things.
Of course,
setting up yourself, it's just irresponsible. And it's not irresponsible in that you'll hurt your client. It's irresponsible in that at some point it'll hurt you. It'll cost you a ton of money to fix the tax issues that you create by not setting it up properly. And there is no easy way of doing it. I mean, I live in Canada. In Canada, we have 11 provinces. And the tax system for each province is different. So if I sell something from Vancouver into Alberta, the taxes are different from if I sell it from Vancouver to somewhere else in British Columbia. We have 11 of them. In New York State alone, there's something like 197 different tax codes. So depending on where you physically are and where your client is, when you sell stuff, the tax code changes. The system that you run have to take that into account to make sure your taxes are correct, right?
Yeah.
And that's just a tax component. Then you have data mining, where you have to make sure that what a customer buys is disconnected from who the customer is, and that who the customer is disconnected from how they paid. Because if someone manages to get into your system, they can't steal all this data. WordPress doesn't do that. It doesn't separate that information, right? Unless you go in and hardwire your servers to handle that. So there's a discussion about the nature of WordPress and what WordPress is for and what it should be used for that needs to be had in the community. Because there's a tendency of trying to push WordPress to become everything. And there's an actual line that when you push WordPress over that line, you're making it into something it was never built to do. And you're creating new risks. And then you have to decide, are we going to evolve WordPress to that point and really add this functionality in which case WordPress becomes something it's not right now? Or are we going to focus on this core user base that currently exists? And that, again, is a conversation that's not being had because it's easier to just constantly iterate on the current platform and just add more features because people ask for them. But because we're so big, there's so many people using it. We need to be very careful about how the decisions we make on behalf of users actually benefit the users, and that the users are aware of those decisions. So when they use WordPress and WordPress gets updated to a new feature, are the users aware of what those updates do to their content?
So basically, users are going to choose, and agencies are also going to choose.
Influence.
Influence it. Yeah. Thank you both for being part of this interview. Hvala vam što ste gledali, nadam se da ćete odlučiti nešto o WordPressu, a morat ćemo netokraciji vidjeti šta ćemo dalje. Vidimo se. Ćao, bye guys.
Bye bye.